righty. While doing the hokey pokey, I put my right hip in, I put my right hip out, and that's where it stayed. Haha, love it.
Mm-hmm.
That was a good one.
Some people are probably laughing at that too, thinking I did put my right hip out doing the
That's,
hokey
that's
pokey.
totally. Oh, it was a little bit to do with the guy I was just talking about, right?
Yep.
All right.
So tonight we're doing metabolic health. And I just wanted to start off with these two great big stats. So 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. That is incredible. So that means that there's only 12% of the population that reaches certain guidelines in terms of measuring metabolic health, which we'll talk about more this evening. Second point, there are 64% of Canadians suffer from chronic disease. So this is like high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, etc. So that's way more than 50% of the population. So almost 2/3. And here in Nova Scotia, we sit at 68.1%. So 68.1% of people suffer from some chronic disease of some sort. So I was just blown away by those facts alone.
And that is high. And you know what? You think about chronic diseases such as diabetes and heart disease, and you know what could lead to down the road strokes. And most of these chronic diseases are preventable diseases, right? They're basically lifestyle conditions. And unfortunately, these lifestyle conditions account, I think I read a stat one time, for about 70% of our healthcare expenditures, right? So we play a huge role in how much we tax our health system, and then we complain about the taxes that we pay and all that stuff. So it's, you know, we have a big responsibility when it comes to taking care of our own health, not just for, you know, the health system, but for our own selves, right? And respecting ourselves enough to care enough about our body, and have the respect for our own body to put in the time and effort and energy to stay healthy, not only for us but for the people around us as well.
Exactly. And so what is metabolic health? And I think that would be a great place to sort of just start. So it's defined as having ideal or within a certain parameter of blood sugar, triglycerides, high density lipoproteins, which are good, cholesterols,
The
blood pressure,
HDL.
some HDL, blood pressure, and weight circumference. This is all without the use of medication. So if you're being medicated to help any of these things or to help your blood pressure reach a certain range, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're metabolically healthy, because it's not the natural reading of your, or the true reading of your blood pressure.
Yeah.
And so blood sugar and blood pressure are really the two that are most stressed, and we'll be talking about that as well. And as well as some of the things that we can do on top of that to help prevent things from getting any worse, and how can we sort of flip the switch and go in the correct direction instead of continuing on a pattern of, I'm just going to medicate, hope for things to resolve themselves.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the body, just like Newton's law, for every force, right, that you put in your body, there's going to be a force that's equal and opposite to that. And so although you're maintaining your blood pressure with your medication, you have to be doing the other things outside of that to help lower it naturally.
It's kind of weird because medication, like, you know, many times I ask people, you know, do you have a high blood pressure? No, high blood pressure is good. Are you on high blood pressure medication? Yep. Yeah, I'm on high blood pressure medication. So the fact that their high blood pressure is okay, they think they don't have it. But the reason they're on a medication is because they have high blood pressure, right? So we associate having or not having it based on a number. But obviously, if you need to be on medications, you have high blood pressure. It's just that the number has been lowered medically by changing your, you know, your chemical setting in your inside your body, and it's being regulated. So it's kind of it's fooling the mind to think that, you know, you don't have high blood pressure, or you don't have diabetes, or your sugar levels are okay because you're managing it with insulin. But
Right, absolutely. So just as a recap, metabolic health, ideal health within the parameters, within the range of those things that we talked about just earlier, the HDL, the blood pressure, waist circumference without medication. And so what we're going to, yeah, sorry.
Yep, no good. Yep.
Great. So what we're going to jump right into is the 6 ways of measuring metabolic health and what each of those means to the individual and why it's important to measure those things.
Cool.
So I just wanted to bring people's attention to the figure to the right there. So this was taken from a study done, census done through the government of Nova Scotia. And so all the graphs here on this presentation were taken from the population here in Nova Scotia. Mind you, this was taken in 2004. And so it's been a few years, let's just say, Dr. Roach, since 2004. So.
Yeah, so you can extrapolate these statistics whichever way you feel, we've been heading into the direction. Things gotten worse, things gotten better. We don't know, but it's the most recent data that we had.
Absolutely. And so what they say is that, if there's 88% of Americans that are metabolically unhealthy, that means that we have 12% of Americans that are metabolically healthy or within the correct parameters. And so who are these people, right? So apparently they are young, female, they're educated, or some type of university, college level education, never a smoker, and physically active. And so they're saying, yes, they should be female, etc. And so I thought that it was interesting when I looked through some of the stats here in Nova Scotia. In Nova Scotia, we have a higher rate of chronic conditions among females, 68.1% in Nova Scotia compared to our national average of 64.1 here in Canada. And as you can see in each one of those chronic conditions, whether it be arthritis, asthma, high blood pressure, or migraines and headaches, women tend to be just a little bit higher than men. So I thought that this would be a stat to bring up just to show the comparison.
So are these married or unmarried, Ben?
They didn't
High blood pressure,
specify.
the headaches. I don't know. We might be to blame on that.
They didn't specify on that. And so there is a vast difference between sex. And so I just wanted to bring that out, that there's a significant difference between the two.
Sure.
And that there are more graphs to come. So 6 ways of measuring metabolic health. So we start with waist circumference, and so usually waist circumference is more important than the actual weight of the individual. And so we're trying to get away from, this measuring of, people's weight, trying to decide, weight is a good factor, but waist circumference is more accurate because we're measuring more of our visceral fat, which is some of our bad fat, because it'll start to crowd our organs, and it's very metabolically active.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, it's funny because weight is something that we look at a lot and make assertions from the weight in terms of how we are healthy. We get that question a lot, when it comes to low back pains. Yeah, I know I got to lose weight, but my point is always that there's many people that are skinny that have low back pain, right? So there's a societal pressure to put emphasis on weight, but the waist circumference, as we're going to talk about, is just an even more important than the number on the scale, right?
Exactly. And again, the visceral fat component, right? And so the amount of visceral fat that's surrounding your organs can have an impact on your metabolism and the way that you process the energy that's put into your body and the way that it's stored. But again, looking away from the actual weight and more towards waist circumference, they say that 20% of lean people are actually metabolically unhealthy. So again, going back to the same point for back pain, even people that are underweight or the perfect weight can still have back pain. And so looking less at that and more towards waist circumference. So a waist circumference greater than 40 inches would be a higher risk, would place an individual at a higher risk for metabolic disease. Now, this is in the male population. In females, it's 35. So a little bit less there. And you measure that just above the hip bones. So if you just feel down to your pelvis there, you can feel the tippy top of your hip bones there. That's where you'd want to take that waist circumference measurement.
Yeah, so 35 for women and 40 for men. So yeah, all this, what we're talking about right now is metabolic syndrome or metabolic disease, which is made up of, certain factors such as your LDL, your blood pressure, your sugar levels, and your waist circumference, as well as your triglycerides. So basically, there's a few things that impact metabolic disease, and it's a multifactorial classification of a disease called metabolic disease. So welcome to Hum Day Conversation.
Absolutely. And so looking towards the next measurement that would then be done to determine, how optimal or where you sit in terms of your metabolic health would be your blood sugar levels. And so you want to be able to ensure that your blood sugar levels are less than 5.7%. And this is because high levels of sugar in the body can lead to such conditions as diabetes, of course, and an array of other issues, including dysfunctions to your nervous system. And so making sure that your sugar levels are proper, not only important for leveling out those levels, but to keep you from developing other diseases such as diabetes.
Yeah, and diabetes is kind of like a gateway to a whole host of problems, when it comes to, the rest of the body. Like you said, nervous system, kidneys, brain, there's so many things that diabetes can affect. And, unfortunately, diabetes comes from, a lot of times, if it's type 2 diabetes, from lifestyle. And, you get type 2 diabetes in your 40s, 50s, it's not easy to change that lifestyle. So you're far better preventing it than letting it get to that point, and you're forced to do it. And maybe it's hard for you to do it. So you end up taking insulin because diet's not going to be enough or exercise not going to be enough. So you're far better, being ahead of it and being proactive with your sugar levels. So it's a great point.
Yeah. Great. So looking towards triglyceride levels, so the end product of digesting and breaking down fats in your food or your triglycerides is crucial in the evaluation of your fat metabolism. So the way that you can break down that fat and use it for energy or to store it for later on.
Hey, Ben, hold on. Just before we go, so the blood sugar levels, I don't think we mentioned that. So normal blood sugar levels, your doctor's going to want to have you be at around 70 to 80. They measure it in milligrams per deciliter. So 70 to 80, less than 100, you're at 100 more, then we're heading into what they call pre-diabetic, or even at the point where you're going to start having recommendations such as insulin or heart-to-heart conversation with your medical doctor in terms of what's going on. Sorry.
Great point. Great point. So yes, moving on to triglyceride levels. It's the end product of digesting and breaking down the fats that you take in from your foods. And so all of the energy in your body gets broken down, and the fats get broken down into these triglycerides. And so they're crucial in measuring how quickly you're able to break that down. So if you have a triglyceride level over 100 is usually questionable. So your medical doctor will start looking to see, okay, do we have any other things going on? It's not a healthy level. And usually over 150 is when you have the term metabolic disease. And so you're not able to properly store or get rid of those triglycerides from your blood.
Yeah, I didn't know this. So there's a ratio between your triglyceride and your HDL. So basically your HDL to triglyceride ratio, if the triglyceride number is more than 2.5 times the HDL, so the triglyceride is higher by 2.5 times the number of your HDL, it's an indicator that your body fat is not accepting shipment of new fat quickly. So it can't get rid of it, right? So you're accumulating triglycerides, that fat, more, like, again, those numbers would be 2.5 times higher than your HDL.
And I think that that's a great measurement as well, because, if we're just measuring HDL levels, we don't know what, really what percentage of the whole triglyceride we have as HDL, right? So it gives us a little bit more of a sensitive reading, right? And then we can sort of extrapolate from that and determine, okay, well, what of the rest of it are the low density lipo proteins, or the bad cholesterol, which we'll be talking about right now, because they also measure that. So
Yeah.
LDL cholesterol, your bad cholesterol levels, you
Bad.
can get the same reading on the same stage as your HDL and your triglyceride levels. And some people even say that it's not enough to just know your LDL cholesterol levels. You can actually get a test, mind you, it costs money, but you can actually get a test off of the usual panel that separates two different types of LDL cholesterol. There's a type A, or one that's buoyant, and it moves freely through the arteries. And then there's the type B, which is one of the stickier types. And so that's the one that you'd want to really watch out for, because those are the ones that will clot your arteries and cause you to have atherosclerosis.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that's what we talk about as well in our pro-life nutrition program, where, cholesterol is known as like a bad thing, but as we're learning tonight, there's the HDL and LDL, there's good and bad cholesterol. Very important is also the viscosity, like how thick, things become inside the vessel walls and the lining. And I always, give an example, if cholesterol would be the beach balls and they're going down a hallway, and you push the beach balls down the hallway, there's no resistance. They're going to get down the hallway. But if you coat the walls of the hallway with, corn syrup and maple syrup, and the balls start to go down, they start to sticking. That's the viscosity, that's the stickiness in the blood vessels, and that's what creates atherosclerosis, or blood, the clotting. Sorry, not the clotting, but the plaquing, and that can be measured by your hemoglobin A1C, right? In terms of how sticky everything is. So,
Yeah, great point. So the next thing that we would then go to and measure, of course, is blood pressure, which is a common practice for a lot of people, is to measure their blood pressure, have you had your blood pressure checked to see where it's at. So it's usually measured for a lot of different health issues. Apparently, there isn't an exact standard for someone's blood pressure. When I was going through school, and what I measure now is 120/80 is the standard. And anything more than that, you have to sort of do some hemming and hawing and ask, okay, well, what did you eat today? How have you been sleeping? What have your stress levels been like, to determine why those levels are so high? Did you have anything to comment on that, Dr. Roach, about no exact standard?
no. I mean, 120/80 has always been what we've been talking about, but they seem to lower that. But I think what happens is, you also have to consider your age, and you have to consider the other factors, right? So I was actually talking about my blood work that just came in with my medical doctor, and he was saying, like, LDL, triglycerides, your age, are you a smoker? What else? Genetic predisposition. So is it in the family? So when you look at all those factors, you can afford to have a higher blood pressure if you have none of the other factors. So I think it's kind of like a moving scale, where it's not just one aspect of the story, it's the whole story together, and all those factors put in. But definitely, the standard for blood pressure has been lowered a little bit. And you always wonder if, it's to get more people on medications. I don't know, but definitely it's a little higher than what it was before. And I think they don't like to see much more than 120 for systolic, and now they're saying 75 for diastolic, the bottom number. So I know it's moved, but definitely a sliding scale from what I was going over with my medical doctor yesterday.
Right. Yeah. Great point. And so another thing that they may measure, and some of these things that we're measuring here may be different in your medical doctor's office, or wherever you go to get these testings done, or to have the panel done. But another thing that I saw was the uric acid levels. And so this is a byproduct, or a waste product, of the breakdown of purines in your blood. And so purines can be harmful to the body. And so part of their breakdown is producing something called uric acid. And so people might be familiar with uric acid when we talk about something called gout, which is an inflammatory arthritis. And so one of the byproducts of metabolic disease, or how you know that the process is in motion is you're perhaps seeing some inflammatory arthritis known as gout.
Right. And, you know, when you have metabolic disease, a lot of the processes that you need in order to digest food and go through all these regular processes in your body aren't happening very well. So if you can't break down food very well, you're going to end up with a buildup of certain things, and they, you know, too little of certain things. But in this case, it's a buildup of uric acid, which, by the way, you know, I don't know a lot of people do that know this, but gout is not only going to be found in your big toe. You know, in practice in 16 years, I've seen it in the wrist, I've seen it in the elbow, I've seen it in the knee. So it's not just a big toe, but definitely painful, red, hot joint. All right.
So if everyone is enjoying this hump day conversation, give us a like, give us some love, give us a share as well, because you never know who might be looking to hear this information, especially if they've never listened to hump day conversations before and they're kind of looking for a little reminder. Maybe I should go in and get my blood work done. Even if you don't suspect and you think that you're metabolically optimal, why don't you go in, just like Dr. Roach said, get your blood work done, get your panel read and see where you're at, where you're sitting, and maybe what improvements you can make.
And what I will say is that these levels are actually part of the regular blood panel, right? So it's not something specific you need to ask your medical doctor. They're usually going to scan for these anyway. So yeah, there's nothing special. It's not like you're asking for like a rheumatoid panel, like blood pressure. You can get it checked, blood sugar, triglyceride, LDL, HDL. It's just part of the regular panel. So you can get a lot of information. Watch this episode again with your numbers in hand so that you can kind of say, you know, remember the ratio with triglyceride and HDL, 2.5 times higher. You know, just be honest with yourself. And I think a lot of this is just, you know, coming to grips with your condition, not feeling bad, not being angry, not being fearful, just taking your health in your own hands and taking an assessment of where you are right now and say, if I continue on this road, what does my future look like? What am I, you know, heading towards? Is that picture good? Is it not good? Are you like, I'm okay, but I could be better? Just, you know, be honest with yourself and, you know, take the necessary steps in doing that.
Ooh, kind of small there. So you guys might have to go a little bit closer to your screen to read the small print. But in case you don't want to do that, and I recommend you don't, I'm going to read them out loud for you, and we'll save your eye health as well as your neck. How's that sound? I hope that sounds pretty good. So how do we promote metabolic health? How can you start today or tomorrow morning? How can we start inducing positive change on these levels? And so again, the graph that's to the right was taken from this Nova Scotia study that was done in 2004. And so those that were physically active, at least 30 minutes, reduced the incidence of these chronic conditions. And each of those are starred. And so there's a significant difference between those that are active and those that are inactive. And we know this already. We know that exercise has positive effects in the body, that exercise is medicine, but it's always interesting to put, you know, what we're saying here on a graph so that you can see significantly how this can change your life.
And the definition of active was what, Ben? How many minutes?
30 minutes of exercise.
30 minutes, guys. Like, come on, 30 minutes. And you can choose to be on the light green or the dark green, right? Which one would you prefer? Like, it's a no-brainer for 30 minutes, you know, and all it has to be is, you know, a consistent walk that can evolve to other things, because as you start to feel better, then you want to do more, right? And you got momentum on your side. You're starting to feel better. You're starting to see a shift maybe in your blood work. And that becomes fuel for you to live a healthier lifestyle, right? So the first one, let's dive into this, decrease sugar, right? The average intake, I'm not sure what the average intake, but what you should have in terms of sugar maximum is 25 grams of sugar. Just take a day and look behind boxes on the labels and look at how much sugar you're taking in. You know, my wife was pretty brilliant in doing this. my oldest daughter took a bag of candies, okay, and she had her little cousin here, and there was Skittles in there, and there's all kinds of stuff, and they just like devoured through the whole thing. So as a, you know, um, modern punishment, we measured how much sugar was in there, and it ended up being 97 grams of sugar in everything that they ate, right? So we poured 97 grams of sugar and just showed her what 97 grams of sugar was and what 25 grams of sugar was, which was her daily intake. So then she could see proportionally what she was supposed to have in one day and how much they ate within probably 15 minutes, right? And then we divide that with how many days, and she was not allowed to have any sugar for those amount of days because she ate it all in one day. So just to put it into perspective, right? So decrease sugar and reduce refined grain consumption. Okay. Big one right there. You do that, you're off to the races.
Don't forget to eat your vegetables. Okay, so I put a little stat there. So of the veggies we do eat, white potatoes, French fries represent over 25% of our intake. So it's not only just eating vegetables, it's diversifying the portfolio. It's diversifying what vegetables you are eating. Yeah, you could be, eating vegetables, but they're, 4 white potatoes and they're cut up into fries and then thrown into the active fry into the air fryer, right? So really making sure that you're mixing it up and that you're putting in the broccolis, that you're getting your greens, right?
Yeah.
That you're eating your leafy green vegetables. There is a huge benefit to that, and starting to make vegetables, the main course of your plate,
Yeah.
instead of just the sidekick.
You know what? Once in a while, instead of having, pasta, white pasta that you're used to having, have spaghetti squash, right? Just switch it up, get different colors in there. So, I think our diet is just a fixture of our imagination. Sometimes we get a little dry and we always eat the same thing, meat and potatoes, potatoes and meat. And, we're kind of raised up that way though, as Acadians, our diet is not well diverse, and it's a lot of the same foods mixed up in a different way, but it typically involves meat and potatoes, right? So, be creative, eat different types of vegetables, but add vegetables. Should be 2/3 of your plate, right? So,
yeah, and great point on spaghetti squash.
yeah, a great salad, by the way. I'm just going to give away my a little recipe for dressing. You basically put 2 tablespoons of olive oil and 1 teaspoon of white wine vinegar. Okay, so it's actually a Gordon Ramsay recipe. So 2 tablespoons of olive oil, 1 teaspoon of white wine vinegar, salt, coarse salt, and pepper, and you basically whisk it. You throw the greens, cucumbers, tomatoes, and you shuffle it all up with a little bit of Parmesan cheese, a little bit. Beautiful salad. 2/3 of your plate, you got your greens in there. Nothing better.
Yeah. So increase your intake of omega-3 fatty acids. So a few weeks ago, we had fish oils and omega-3s on as our supplement of the month. And so you guys all know about the positive impacts and effects of omega-3s, but I just want to say why it's important when it comes to metabolic health at this point. So it can lower your blood pressure. It reduces the triglycerides in your blood. So it says, what I saw in a study was 15 to 30%. Slows the plaquing in the arteries and reduces the amount of inflammation that you have in your body. And so therefore reducing those inflammatory byproducts, like uric acid.
And another Trivial Pursuit stat, grass-fed meat versus grain-fed meat. Grass-fed till the end, okay? Grass-fed meat has 7 times more omega-3s than versus grain-fed beef, okay? So red meat always gets a bad rap, but it's red meat that was fed grains. That's the issue, because grains are high in omega-6, and omega-6 is pro-inflammatory. Omega-6 is anti-inflammatory. So grass-fed meat is where it's at.
We already talked about the benefits of exercise. what types of exercise. So cardio, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go for a 10-kilometer run, a 450 pace. Just go for a light walk, a walk in the park, get your heart rate elevated. When you're out for that little walk, why don't you put a little jump in your step for a minute, and just do a light jog, a fast walk. They also recommend that you do some resistance training. And so either lifting a book, right? If you have a heavy book at your house, if you have the Bible, and you can do your bicep curls with the Bible.
Yeah.
Give yourself
And
some
great for what
exercise.
we were talking about, was it last week about osteoporosis?
Yes.
Right? You need to have resistance training. Women got to do resistance training, especially if you're postmenopausal. Bone density goes down. You got to stress bone.
Absolutely. And so cardio and resistance training. So these are our 4 tips on how to promote metabolic health. And you've all actually got a bonus tip in there with Dr. Roach's salad dressing.
Yeah, the talk was worth just because of that salad dressing. Guys, if you like this episode, give us a thumbs up again. Hearts, we love those engagements, right? And I'm glad you guys have been watching. Thank you so much. I see you guys here that have been with us since episode 1. So thank you for the support. And we love doing this.
Osteobase, supplement of the month. Yes. So this is to help because the last week we spoke about osteoporosis. And so we wanted to bring forward a supplement for this month that would help improve bone health and help with the absorption of vitamin D, magnesium, and vitamin K, which all play a dynamic role in the absorption of calcium into your bone. Current research estimates that 70% of the US population doesn't meet the estimated requirements or averages for vitamin D. So you can assume that the Canadian population as well would be lined up, especially given the amount of time that we have in winter months. And so we're missing out on that.
Yes, 13 to 14 minerals in bone, right? It's not just calcium. It's an orchestrated play between all these minerals that keep a good ratio of bone cells dying and bone cells being born. So that way you have a good flow of that, cellular death and cellular production, and that the bone that you actually have is actually strong. Big research on Fosamax and a lot of those osteoporosis medications that they build bone but weak bone. So it's a false sense of security when you're taking Fosamax. Not a great thing to get on, and definitely better to prevent, as always, right? As you know what they say, an ounce of prevention. Yep. So Hump Day Conversation 40. Go ahead, Ben. I think
I was just gonna tag on and just say, guys, so something that we should take away from, this being our 40th Hump Day Conversation is that we've done this for 40 weeks. This is our 40th week of Hump Day Conversation. So from day one, in the new year, when we first started doing this, we wanted to say, there's no better time than the now. There's no better time than now to get healthy. There's no better time than now to start looking into how can I have a positive impact and how can I create change in the lives of myself, in my life. And then by creating change in the life of myself, how can I then create change in the lives of those that are around me, instead of being a product of what we're usually a product of our environment.
I just want to say 2 things. I think part of getting started is you can't compare yourself to others, right? Because you might be comparing yourself unbeknownst to someone that has been, doing this for 3 or 4 years, right? Or been doing it their whole life. You're like, well, I can't do that. But the goal is not to be them. The goal is for you to create a starting point today. So stop comparing. Number 2, this is a saying that I love, is we always overestimate what we can do, what we can do in a short period of time, but we underestimate what we can do in a long period of time. So, sometimes we're unrealistic with the goals that we set, right? And we're going to do this in 1 month or January 1st. We've done a Hump Day Conversation on January 1st. what we want to do is make sure that we're realistic and we set what's called SMART goals, right? But the key is to get started with something. Start tomorrow with a 10-minute walk, right? The key is getting into a rhythm. And once you're in a rhythm for 2-3 weeks, it becomes kind of like infectious, where you kind of say, oh, I can't stop right now. I got to keep going, right? And then that little 10-minute walk starts, leading into something else. Maybe you started having 2/3 of your plate be vegetables, and one thing leads to another. And all of a sudden, a year goes by, and you look at the day you decided to start, and all the changes that have happened in your life. And now you get another blood, blood work done, and I say, oh, your cholesterol is a little lower. Well, you get these little confirmations that you're doing the right things and you're heading in the right direction. So, you owe it to yourself. Your body, it's going to be the longest relationship that you ever have is with yourself, right? So you might as well make it a healthy one, because life is short. And, to be battling chronic diseases like the ones we talked about tonight, metabolic health disease, it is a long, long life if, you can't enjoy what you want to enjoy, right? So don't shorten your life, lengthen your life, and put the odds in your favor to be able to do what you want to do whenever you want to do it. So just get going, just do it.
Absolutely. And that's why we're doing Hump Day Conversations. So
Absolutely.
again, thank you guys so much. This is Hump Day Conversation number 40. Again, thank you for those who are tuned in since day one. Some of you are on here right now as we speak. So thank you again for being with us live and for tuning in every week, and your enthusiasm keeps us going each and every single week. So don't stop. You guys are on a great road, and we look forward to seeing you all in clinic.
Thank you so much, Ben, for the work that you do too in preparing these conversations and, the slides and everything. It definitely, creates a visual experience for people. And I think that helps as well. We actually asked a few people if they like the slides, and many of you said yes, because it kind of allows you to take notes and stuff, and rewatch these episodes if you miss something. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to us. Make sure you get alerted when there's a new conversation that comes up. And again, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for being there. So on that note, we will see you next week with Hump Day Conversation number 41. And hope you have a great rest of your week. Make sure you go out and enjoy the beautiful weather that is still here with us. And we will see you next week. Thank you and good night.
Good night.
What's up, guys? Listen, if you like this episode, you'll probably like the other ones. Chances are pretty good, so here's what you need to do. You need to like us and follow us on Facebook. Following means you get notified when these two guys are live. Next, family, friends. You need to share these episodes because you never know. You might help them because they need this information as well.
And guys, if you ever miss an episode, make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. That way you can watch the episode over and over and over again.
Guys, we love you and appreciate you.
Take care.